Okay. The William W. Hay Railroad Seminar Series is sponsored by the National University Rail Center here at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And on behalf of all of us, we thank the USDOT for their ongoing support. It's greatly appreciated by those of us here on campus, as well as those participating via the internet. And today, participating via the internet, we have guests from Metra, TUV Rail Sciences, Patrick Engineering, LTK Engineering, AECOM, and one more, and from Parsons. Welcome. So let me give a brief introduction to the general premise of our talks today. The New Rail Center, like all UTCs, has a multifaceted mission of education, research, technology transfer, and workforce development. And a critical aspect of this mission is graduate student research, which, if properly executed, achieves all four of these objectives. It does so by engaging students in meaningful research that enhances their education, produces new understanding of current and future challenges facing transportation, offers solutions to the transportation community, and prepares them well for careers in the field. Meanwhile, the New Rail Center's theme is focused on addressing the challenges and opportunities of shared freight and passenger rail corridors. With that in mind, we decided to combine all of these goals by using the Hay Seminar Series to offer a mini symposium of New Rail graduate students' research related to this theme. We heard two student presentations a couple of weeks ago, and today we're going to hear from two more working on different aspects of shared rail corridors. And we're taking advantage of technology by enabling the students to make their presentations from their respective home institutions via the internet. So today we're going to be hearing from Sam Levy at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who's going to be giving the first presentation on shared use passenger corridors in California. And secondly, we'll hear from Ahmadreza Talebian from the University of Illinois Chicago, who's going to be talking about capacity allocation in vertically integrated railway systems. So I'll introduce our first speaker, Sam Levy. In 2012, the California High-Speed Rail Authority adopted a blended system at the two ends of the state's planned high-speed rail line. In this blended operation, the high-speed rail line will share track and other infrastructure with commuter rail, intercity rail, and freight on portions of the corridor. Consequently, a new paradigm is needed for implementation of the system. Sam's presentation will review the upcoming local design choices to be made from the perspective of the future statewide rail network. Mr. Levy is completing his Master's of Science in Transportation degree at MIT, working under Professor Joe Sussman in his Regional Transportation and High-Speed Rail Group. Originally from Redwood City, California, Sam, not Joe that is, graduated from the University of South Carolina with a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering and a minor in Economics in 2013. He's interned for transportation consulting firms, a heavy civil bridge contractor, a municipal transportation agency, and spent his last summer at Aero Mexico working in revenue management systems. I'd like to introduce Sam Levy.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for reminding me to speak today. Before we get started, I just want to clarify it's the University of Southern California, not South Carolina. So I'm excited to share my work with everyone listening in, both at RailTech and online. Excuse me. I wish I could be with you all in Illinois this afternoon. Garrett told me of pizza over there, and there's nothing a grad student likes more than free food. And now I hear there's a happy hour as well. My presentation today will focus on my thesis work, which looks at the implementation challenges of operating high-speed rail, commuter rail, and freight on shared tracks. Sure. Yep. Yep. First, I just wanted to clarify that I'm not a Gamecock. I'm a Trojan from University of Southern California, not South Carolina. but I'm excited to be here online today to share my work with everyone listening in, both at Railtech and online. I heard you all have pizza over there. I wish I could be there in person. There's nothing a grad student likes more than free food. My presentation today will focus on my thesis work, which looks at implementation challenges of operating high-speed rail, commuter rail, and freight on shared tracks with an emphasis on my home state, California. This is the first time I've given a presentation in this webinar format, so I thought I'd share a recent photo of myself during our snowpocalypse, so I can put a face to the voice. I'm happy to report it's finally warm enough in Boston to wear these shorts on a more regular basis. So today I'll start out by introducing you to the California High-Speed Rail Project, followed by my research interests. Next we'll discuss the Peninsula Corridor and the so-called planned blended system with high-speed rail and conventional rail on the north and south endpoints of the line. And next we'll finally talk about the meat of my thesis, which is how decisions are made on local blended corridors and how they have an impact on the state rail network as a whole. Let's do a quick overview of the high-speed rail project for those unfamiliar. The project is a response to the state expecting to add 20 million residents to its current 40 million by 2050. Project proponents contend that this is the most cost-effective way to add transportation capacity in the country's largest economy. The project's cost is $68 billion, most of which is expected to come from private investment after successful construction and profitable operation of an initial operating segment between Merced in Central California and Burbank, about 13 miles north of downtown Los Angeles. You can see that initial operating segment on that yellow line of the map at right, between Merced there and Burbank. A $10 billion bond measure is the project's main source of funding at this point. However, the measure stipulates that 2-hour and 40-minute travel time between Los Angeles and San Francisco, as well as a system capable of 5-minute headways operating at an operational profit. One important piece of the bond measure is this $950 million in connectivity funding, which will enhance local rail capacity along the corridor. California broke ground on construction in Fresno, California, in the center of the state in January this year. Currently, 94 miles of non-track infrastructure are under construction contracts. And so far, not much has been constructed due to difficulties with property acquisition, though many buildings have been demolished in downtown Fresno. One of the competing interests in California, worth mentioning, is the ongoing drought. Earlier this month, Governor Jerry Brown, in the center of that top picture there, issued the state's first mandatory water restrictions. The $23 billion project to build new water tunnels is also under consideration in Sacramento. Here's a quote from Jerry Brown demonstrating his role as one of the project's biggest cheerleaders. He was instrumental in directing California carbon tax revenues to the high-speed rail project. And while he enjoys strong political support in California, he is currently serving his last term in the governor's office. And as this quote from Brown attests, there is still much work to do in terms of funding, not to mention construction. The two main research motivations for me for this thesis have been, first, to improve capacity management in the Golden State, and second, to understand the ramifications of trying to optimize corridors from the local perspective versus the system-wide perspective. As demand for passenger rail grows in the best state in the Union, capacity is more precious than ever, and we need to carefully plan for implementation of high-speed rail on tracks that are already capacity constrained. My research questions are, first, how do decision makers on the peninsula, how do their decisions affect the rest of the state of California? Second, how can local agencies like the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board or the Southern California Regional Rail Authority prepare for a blended future with high-speed rail? And finally, what needs to happen to bring California not just a high-speed rail line, but also a fully functioning rail network with local connectivity that maximizes ridership and provides a seamless customer experience, not just for those inner-city high-speed rail travelers, but also for local commuters. Now let's turn to the Peninsula Corridor. I like this Southern Pacific map from 1905 because it shows how little the 50-mile rail line between San Francisco and San Jose has changed. Caltrain, the brand of rail service shown at right, is the local commuter rail operator managed by the three-county Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board. It operates 92 trains a day. 22 of those trains are baby bullets, which are named not because they go faster than 79 miles an hour, but because they connect San Francisco and San Jose in less than an hour by only serving 5 or 6 stations along the 29 or so station line. The corridor is predominantly 2 tracks, aside from 2 4-track sections constructed to facilitate those baby bullet overtakes. And residents are wary of any kind of expansion. There's a small but long-term freight presence on the corridor. This is a remnant of when the Southern Pacific Railroad owned the line. The corridor is supposed to be electrified in 2021 and extended into downtown San Francisco from its current terminus on the city's fringe in 2024. While I will discuss these projects more in the next 2 slides, these projects are partially funded by that aforementioned high-speed rail connectivity funding from the high-speed rail bond measure. Caltrain has been breaking ridership records year after year. If you ask anyone on the Caltrain staff, they will tell you a lot of this growth is attributed to the baby bullet service providing faster trip times for commuters. 2 unique characteristics of Caltrain operations are, first, it has relatively balanced flows. In the morning, almost as many passengers, 40%, commute out of downtown San Francisco to jobs in Silicon Valley. Second, it has the highest bike ridership for any transit agency in the country. Over 6,000 people bring their bikes on board each day to make last-mile connections in San Francisco or to connect to Baby Bullet Express service. One challenge with the Baby Bullet service is just that. It has pulled ridership to stations that allow for express service and overtakes, not necessarily stations located near jobs or near residents. Electrification has the power to change that. By allowing for faster acceleration and deceleration, more local stops can be served in the same corridor runtime. Service at non-Baby Bullet stations might help reduce the need for a bicycle, which will help reduce the bicycle crowding issue. The downtown extension to this Transbay Transit Center, we're extending from the right side of the screen to that orange box on the left, will trump electrification. It has been called the single most important project in the railroad's history. Currently, downtown San Francisco is a transfer and a 15-minute bus, light rail, or bicycle ride from the existing Caltrain terminus to the one at 4th and King. When we perform a GIS buffer analysis, we find that there are more jobs, about 80,000, within a quarter mile of that orange box in the new terminal than all other Caltrain stations combined. And this is not even counting the huge commercial and residential development that's under construction right now directly above the new terminal. This project is scheduled to be completed at approximately the same time as high-speed rail arriving on the corridor in the mid-2020s. Which brings us to high-speed rail. While the 2008 bond measure called for a 4-track corridor, local opposition, seen here right with this mock high-speed rail viaduct, which was represented by 2 man lifts and a big net, and a revised budget of $100 billion for the high-speed rail system in 2012, up from $45 billion in 2008, led authority officials to switch to a blended system. According to the High-Speed Rail Authority, blended means, quote, seek to use new and existing rail infrastructure more efficiently through coordinated delivery of services, including interlining of trains from one system or another, as well as integrated scheduling to create seamless connections. Of course, this puts some of the Proposition 1A requirements at risk. A blended system is a revenue risk, as a high-speed operator might not get the capacity it needs on a corridor shared with and owned by another operator. The travel time requirement and head rate requirement are a risk as well, as are the subject, and they are already the subject of lawsuits against the authority. Because of the corridor will not be fully grade separated, the maximum achievable speed is 125 miles an hour, not 220, which results in an exactly 30-minute runtime between San Francisco and San Jose. And the FRA, as you may know, requires impenetrable barriers on 125-mile-an-hour corridors. These will no doubt run into local opposition, most likely on the grounds of road traffic delay induced by 30-plus grade crossings along the 50-mile corridor. 2 slides ago, I hopefully convinced you of the value of the Transbay Transit Center to Peninsula commuters. The SF terminal will be just as, probably if not more important, to high-speed rail. The Transbay Transit Center has the best access to jobs in transit, which is important to car-free San Francisco commuters. While a high-speed rail trip between Los Angeles and San Francisco will take longer than a flight, being able to offer a one-seat ride to San Francisco's urban core and at high-speed rail frequency levels will be the rail line's competitive advantage. And while high-speed rail will compete with Caltrain spatially for access to Transbay, it will compete temporally as well. If we look at seats in and out of San Francisco on an intra-California destinations, such as Los Angeles, Bakersfield, or Fresno, we see that seats overlap with peak Caltrain commute times. This is common in those short-haul air markets. The highest revenue flights are during the morning and afternoon peak, as that affords business travelers productivity during the workday. So what does this blended system mean? It raises a lot of important questions that have not yet been answered. Currently, the most recent service plans call for 2 Caltrain trains per hour per direction into that coveted Transbay Transit Center space. I question whether this is enough capacity for such an important station. Secondly, Caltrain owns the corridor. How does that affect the ability of a high-speed operator to change service levels? Based on analysis by LTK Engineering, the corridor, even with an expanded midline overtake, can handle 10 trains per hour per direction. Anything beyond that will likely be a zero-sum game. That is, an additional commuter train will likely be one less high-speed rail train, and vice versa. Finally, freight and other tenant railroads will need to be accommodated. Union Pacific, for good reason, appears unwilling to part with its trackage rights on the line, and Caltrain has yet to obtain a Public Utilities Commission waiver for 25 kilovolt operation on shared track. In LTK's analysis of the blended corridor, we see here how commuter service uniformity degrades when you add just one high-speed train to the corridor. Interestingly, while the corridor is owned by Caltrain, the 1.3-mile downtown extension and Transbay Transit Center rail station will be owned by the third-party Transbay Joint Powers Authority. This vertically separated environment raises some intriguing questions. I applied Caltrain's operating costs and high-speed rail's projected operating costs to our group's 2015 TRV paper. This paper looked at the train operator's ability to pay for access charges, and unsurprisingly, high-speed rail has a much higher ability to pay for access to the downtown terminal. Will this leave Caltrain commuters stuck back at the current 4th and King station? A capacity allocation procedure, such as auctions or sequential bargaining, as we'll hear about from Ahmadreza shortly, will likely have downline effects in Southern California, such as headway gaps into San Francisco that a high-speed rail operator wants to avoid. And optimizing a 1.3 miles section of an 800-mile system seems a little counterintuitive. Thusly, I believe the capacity in Transbay will likely require careful negotiation between Caltrain and the High-Speed Rail Authority, and hopefully other railroads across the state. Now let's head south and sort of discuss what's going on in Southern California. When the High-Speed Rail Authority switched to a blended system on the peninsula, they opted for a similar strategy in the Southland. The blended system in Southern California is very similar to high-speed rail, that it will share track with commuter rail operators and freight on a congested right-of-way. The Los Angeles-Anaheim trunk is owned by the BNSF Railway, and the line intersects BNSF's gigantic and very financially important Hobart Intermodal Yard. From 2022 to 2028, as part of the phased implementation, the plan is to truncate the line 13 miles north of Los Angeles and force travelers to transfer to a diesel commuter rail operation like Metrolink or Amtrak Pacific Silver Line. Unlike on the peninsula, there are no plans to electrify the commuter rail operations or share station platforms as of yet. And finally, one of the reasons it's exciting for me personally to look at Southern California is that, in the words of high-speed rail project spokesman Lisa Marie Alley back in January, all options are still on the table. Los Angeles, we'll talk briefly about Los Angeles Union Station, the hub of rail traffic in Southern California. It's the 5th busiest in the United States, and will undoubtedly be a critical hub of the high-speed rail network. Local transit, believe it or not, is very strong, and which will provide good connections, and downtown is about a mile south of the station. One of the key capacity improvement projects in the Southern California region for passenger rail is the Southern California Regional Interconnector Project, or SCRIP. This will transform the terminal from a stub-end terminal to one where trains can run through from north to south instead of backing in and out. Only 4 of the 14 tracks, however, will actually run through, and high-speed rail will use at least 2 of these. So if we take a look at the planning documents, board meeting agendas, we infer a wish list, so to speak, for the California Rail Network. It's important that I say California Rail Network and not California High-Speed Rail Network. the nature of the blended system, in my opinion, demands that the powers that be in the state treat high-speed rail not as a dedicated system as originally planned, but one that integrates with commuter and intercity railroads up and down the state. Let's quickly go through this wish list. First, level boarding creates operational advantages that reduce dwell time and improve reliability, a key component of a well-functioning high-speed rail system. Interoperability is key to providing adequate service with limited capacity and is a central tenet of that blended system philosophy. Second, a high-speed rail operator, as well as a commuter operator, should be able to adjust service to manage demand and adapt to changing conditions. Next, Express West, which is a private venture that plans to connect the high-speed rail station at Palmdale to Las Vegas, could maximize its utility to the public by providing a one-seat ride into Los Angeles or even into San Francisco. Next, an integrated Southern California rail network will improve upon the existing one, which is impressive on a track mile basis, but is rather splintered and has been underperforming in terms of ridership. The incoming high-speed rail system definitely presents an opportunity to redesign a network that provides seamless connections to intra- and inter-regional travelers. Next, high frequency and uniform headway high-speed rail commuter service is important to creating that important ridership and revenue. And then in creating the system, I think it's important that the High-Speed Rail Authority respect the promises it made to voters in the 2008 bond measure. And finally, it is in everyone's interest to minimize costs and construction timelines across the network to bring the most people, or the most rail to the most people in the least amount of time. So to that end, we've identified 4 key decisions that will affect California's ability to achieve its rail aspirations. The first is regarding the agency to include in the discussion of platform and vehicle height. Which agencies need level boarding and which ones will be a costly inconvenience? Next, how should capacity on the rail line be divvied up? Should there be a set of rules for allocating capacity, or can all railroads, both passenger and freight, agree on service levels prior to construction? This is very important from a revenue perspective for a high-speed rail operator. Next, should the shared Southern California Corridor be electrified as soon as possible, or should high-speed rail spend 6 years with that temporary terminal in Burbank forcing passengers to transfer through diesel trains to move on to Los Angeles and point south? And finally, should the Peninsula Main Line be kept as is, or should the High-Speed Rail Authority push for potentially politically challenging capacity expansions? I will not go into detail here, but in my thesis, I take a look at each decision and its effect on those goals from that wish list I talked about on the last slide and shown here in the bottom right. For example, if all parties act alone on the platform height discussion, interoperability becomes much more difficult and integration in Southern California is much less impactful, since Metrolink could not use high-speed rail stations, vice versa. Since commuter rail is less integrated, the ability for it to feed into high-speed rail is diminished, as are the revenue opportunities for customers that do not live close to a high-speed rail station. So let's recap what we've discussed today. First, decisions made on the peninsula can create capacity bottlenecks that will affect high-speed rail trains on an interregional level. Since Northern California is attacking these blended issues presently with the concurrent electrification of Caltrain, a precedent is being set for their neighbors to the south. Next, a potential high-speed operator will demand a risk premium if it cannot get the service it needs to run profitably. How can California reduce this risk before it goes out to bid for a private concession contract? Next, truly integrated operations have potential to bring high-speed rail as a revenue source. Like regional airlines feed into international hubs, so too can commuter rail service feed into an interregional high-speed network. And finally, I think service planning should drive infrastructure decisions. In an era where infrastructure such as new high-speed rail stations and electrification are expensive, and where the public is leery of mega projects, California can set an example for well-conceived, well-integrated rail system. With that, I thank you. I want to leave on this postcard. One day it might feature a high-speed rail train speeding across the state right next to those 2 surfer girls. But for now, I'm happy to take questions. Before I do, I'd like to thank my undergraduate research assistant, Dajan Faulkner, for his help in forming research and putting together many of the figures you saw today, and for New Rail for sponsoring this research. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. We do have time for a few questions. I don't know if we have questions from anybody here. Well, it looks like we don't, so I'm going to then, do we have any questions coming in from online? No. Well, Sam, again, very well organized and clear presentation, so thanks very much. So next we'll move on to Ahmadreza's presentation. Okay, but everybody can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, our next presentation will describe research that proposes a game-theoretic bargaining-based approach to allocating rail line capacity in the vertically integrated U.S. rail system. So consider a passenger rail agency negotiates with a freight railroad to obtain appropriate train paths. The freight railroad charges the passenger railroad a fee for access to the railroad. On the other hand, the freight railroad compensates the passenger railroad for deviation from preferred passenger train schedules. The objective of this model is to determine the equilibrium schedule and the corresponding internal transfer between the agents. Our speaker today is Ahmadreza Talebian. He's a doctoral student in transportation engineering in the Department of Civil and Materials Engineering at the University of Illinois in Chicago. He received his master's in transportation planning in 2011 from Sharif University of Technology in Iran, and his BS in civil engineering in 2008 from Isfahan University of Technology. His research interests include rail service scheduling on a shared-use passenger and freight corridors, application of game theory and transportation modeling, transportation demand management, and fuzzy approach in transportation modeling. His research has been sponsored in part by the Illinois Department of Transportation and the Urban Transportation Center at the University of Illinois Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Ahmadreza Talebian.
Thank you, Chris. Do you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. Also, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my work. My presentation is on capacity allocation in vertically integrated systems. As you mentioned, I will propose a sequential bargaining game approach with focus on the U.S. context. And first, I will give you a brief background. Then I'll talk about the model, which consists of two stages: pre-processing stage and gaming stage. And then I'll present numerical analysis and finish it with concluded with some major findings. So Amtrak has set 10 ridership records during the past 12 years, and this flourishing of passenger rail transportation is accompanied by development of high-speed and higher-speed rail systems in the U.S. In the Midwest, we will be having 110 miles per hour, single tracks, basically higher speed rail, and the existing track is being upgraded to accommodate those trains. And you can see the map of the system in which Chicago will play a key role, and it will be the hub of the system. On the freight side, Class 1 railroads has experienced about 15% increase in their revenue ton miles between 2001 and 2011, and we have also know about the very significant increase in originated carloads of crude oil on Class 1 railroads. And when we are talking about higher speed rail lines, we have some challenges. First of all, the track is single track, so we will have some meets and overpasses. Second, we have we simultaneously have freight and passenger trains, and the speed heterogeneity between these two trains will cause negative impacts on capacity utilization. And also, we are talking about high-speed trains running at 110 miles per hour. So on-time performance is also very essential. Altogether, it's very important to develop a capacity allocation scheme which takes into consideration all the characteristics of the U.S. railway system. And in this research, I have proposed the first sequential bargaining approach to capacity allocation in the U.S. railway system. There are some issues which should be considered. First of all, rail tracks show a complementary feature. So possessing or basically occupying a specific track at a specific time has no value. A train pass is important. Second, the capacity is endogenous, which means that railway capacity would be determined through the scheduling process, and Amtrak by law has absolute priority over all freight trains. Also, we know that passenger demand has some temporal variations, and from a passenger rail agency's perspective, it's very important to have a schedule which is very convenient to passengers. And on the freight side, we know that freight railroads keep their operating and financial information confidential. We propose a model which has two stages: pre-processing stage, which has 3 modules, as you can see here, and equilibrium determination stage, which has 2 modules. I will describe each module in details. Let's start with the first module, computing passenger delay components. First of all, we assume that a set of feasible passenger train schedules is given. Let's call it FPTS, and also fare is constant. In addition, we assume an initial schedule and associated travel demand are given. Basically, this initial schedule is the most preferred one. And we consider 2 delay components for the passenger side: schedule delay and en route delay. So what is a schedule delay? Schedule delay is defined as the difference between one's desired departure time and the actual departure time. I think this figure will illustrate the concept. Let's look at the, let's say, red bar. Basically, each bar represents the number of passengers whose preferred departure time falls in that specific period. So for this red bar, we can say 14 travelers prefer to depart their origin at, let's say, 9 o'clock. So for these passengers represented by the red bar, they have to decide between the first train departure and the second train departure. Since the first train departure is closer, they shift to the first train, and the time difference between, let's say, 7:30, the departure time of the first train, and their preferred departure time is like 1.5 hours. This time would be the schedule delay of those passengers. So let's say the distribution of PDT and passengers is something like this, and then each OD pair has a distribution of PDT, passenger preferred departure time, and also the departure time, the number of passenger trains are predetermined. Then we can calculate the total schedule delay of all passengers for this specific schedule, and we do it for all schedules which in FPTS, the set of feasible train schedules. And then we should know that the passenger demand is elastic with respect to schedule delay. So we find the number of passengers departing the origin of station pair W, each station pair W at each time period S, using the elasticity formula, as you can see here. The next module is solving the freight train scheduling problem. And first of all, we know that the freight train scheduling is less precise and stringent in the US context. And we have used our previous study to do this. And we fixed the passenger trains and insert freight trains among those fixed passenger trains, and then our approach, the objective of our approach is to minimize total cost to the freight side, which consists of lost demand cost, train en route delay cost, and departure delay cost. So once we determined the schedule for the freight train schedule, which is associated with each feasible set of each feasible passenger train schedule, we can establish the utility and cost values. For the passenger side, we consider utility value for each schedule, and that is operating revenue minus total cost, which consists of passenger schedule delay cost, operating cost of stopping status, and passenger en route delay cost. And on the freight side, we consider total cost, and that is lost demand cost plus track maintenance cost plus departure delay cost plus en route delay cost and operating cost. In the next step, we solve equilibrium a game called Rubinstein bargaining game. Basically, the game is something like this. It starts with passenger rail agency, PRA, and FRR stands for freight railroad. So in the first step, passenger rail agency proposes a schedule to the freight railroad. Also, because this schedule could have a deviation from his preferred schedule, the passenger rail agency also asks for schedule deviation penalty for this schedule. Then freight railroad decides and basically determines an access charge for this schedule, and the passenger rail agency decides to accept or reject the schedule. If PRA accepts the schedule, he will immediately realize a payoff which is equal to UP plus SDP1 minus AF1, and then similar to this, FRR will understand the payoff. And if the passenger rail agency rejects the offer, the next subgame would be FRR's turn to propose a schedule, and then FRR proposes a schedule, and then also an access fee, and then passenger rail agency determines a schedule deviation penalty, and we consider no deadline for this game, so the game would be infinite horizon bargaining game. We solve this game using the stationary structure of the game, and determine the equilibrium schedule, which is a schedule minimizing the PRA's utility minus FRR's cost, and we show that this schedule is independent of the player initiating the game, and the net transfer from PRA to FRR would be something like this. The equation would be this. And then let's look at the incomplete information bargaining game. The incomplete information bargaining game, why we look at this game? Because Class 1 railroads do not publish their financial information. They believe that it is very critical to their profitability. Therefore, Amtrak doesn't have a complete information of the when it negotiates with the freight railroad. We were not able to solve the original problem for the incomplete information setting, so we slightly changed the setting in the game. So now we have a two-level bargaining game. At the upper level, we have price bargaining, which is done for each single schedule, but this is not a real bargaining game. This is something which happens in the mind of each player. And then we have lower level bargaining, which is a schedule bargaining. At the upper level price bargaining, we consider two types for FRR, low cost FRR, let's say LFRR, and high cost FRR, HFRR. And then there's a prior belief for PRA. Basically, PRA believes that the probability of FRR to be high cost FRR is theta, and the game would be something like this. So the dashed line means that PRA doesn't know does not know the on which part is located. So nature determines the type of FRR, and then the game would continue. It's it's quite similar to the previous game. And then we conjecture two equilibria for this game, but only one of them will occur. Which one depends on the theta value. We solve this game and determine the the Bayesian Nash equilibrium for this game. And let's look at the next game, which is the schedule bargaining. The schedule bargaining would be a complete information bargaining game, and we determine the schedule, the equilibrium schedule. All of them are determined analytically. And let's look at the numeric results that we have now. We consider a line composed of 11 blocks, 6 tracks, 6 single track segments, and 5 tracks with 5 and also 5 sidings. There are 2 OD pairs, one in each direction. Each single track is 18 miles long, and double tracks, basically sidings, are 2 miles long, and the total length of the corridor is 120 miles. Operating speed for freight trains is 60 miles per hour, and for passenger trains is 120 miles per hour. And we also consider elasticity of demand with respect to service frequency, and we increase the number of passenger trains from 1 to 6 in each direction. Also, the discount factors for passenger and freight are 0.9 and 0.85 respectively. So, as you can see here, the left-hand side shows the access charge, basically the net transfer between two agents, access fee minus schedule deviation penalty in terms of $1,000. And if the game starts with PRA, and the right-hand side panel shows the game which starts with FRR's proposal. So the net transfer for the game would be greater if FRR initiates the game. And then we also observe that the net transfer could be even negative. So which implies that if the FRR considers very high, basically more than in most cases more than 3. More than 3 more than 3 time periods buffer time for the passenger rate for passenger trains, then this utility of the schedule would be very high for Amtrak. Then Amtrak, or basically the passenger rail agency, will demand such a large schedule deviation penalty, and subsequently the net transfer would be negative, which means that basically freight railroad has to compensate, give some money to the passenger rail agency. And then we also look at the, for example, we look at as game with 6 passenger trains in each direction, and buffer time, where buffer time is 2 time periods, and by the way, each time period is 5 minutes, and we observe that the discount factors significantly impact the net internal transfer. Basically, each discount factor means that how patient is each player. So if the players are not are very patient, the discount factor is 1, and for extremely impatient player, the discount factor is 0. And as you can see here, that the net internal transfer could vary between minus 25,000 or something like that to 40,000. And to conclude, I would like to note that we have proposed the first sequential bargaining game model to identify capacity shares and associated charges on shared use corridors. We proposed 2 settings: complete information game and incomplete information game. In the complete information game, we found that the schedule maximizing the utility of the passenger rail agency minus the cost of the freight rail is the equilibrium solution, and the equilibrium schedule is independent of the player who initiates the game. We also proposed the 2-level price and scheduling bargaining for the incomplete information case, and our ongoing research is working on the numerical analysis of the model. And thank you everybody for your attention. Any questions and comments?
We do have time for some questions. Well, I've got one, Ahmadreza. This is awkward. Everybody's got to come up here for questions. Ahmadreza?
Yes.
So this is Chris. So I have a question.
Sure. Basically, we have, let me show you. Okay, here it is. So for the passenger rail agency, first of all, we mostly use the parameter values in the literature. For the passenger rail agency, we say each schedule has a utility to the passenger rail agency, and this is the summation of operator revenue, basically fare revenue, total number of passengers multiplied the fare value. If we have multiple stations, then the fare for each station pair would be different. So the passenger rail agency's utility would be total revenue minus total cost. And by the way, this is an incremental. So we have a baseline because this is a utility. We have a baseline, and that baseline is the most preferred schedule for the passenger rail agency. And the utility of each schedule is defined as operator revenue minus some cost, and that cost is passenger schedule delay cost, en route delay cost, and operating cost of stopping status. we consider freight passenger trains as must-run trains. So the only part of operating cost which is important would be operating cost of stopping status. On the freight side, we consider lost demand cost, which is incurred by the freight railroad due to insufficient capacity of the line, basically scarce capacity, and then we have track maintenance cost, which is a function of the schedule, departure delay cost, en route delay cost, and operating cost. For all of these cost elements and also revenue, we consider unit values determined by other researchers. For example, from this track maintenance cost, I am using one of your papers. Let me recall it. Yeah. I think it was a cost, it's called the, cost effectiveness of railway infrastructure renewal maintenance.
That sounds like, Grimes, Avery Grimes paper.
Yeah, with Grimes and you. Yeah.
So that's fine. So we're looking at your slide, and I understand that. I guess the question I have is, I don't think this is in fact the formula that Amtrak pays by a pretty considerable margin. We are fortunate to have someone in the room who might be able to speak to this. I don't know if you can, Mark, but you have to actually stand by that.
This is a fascinating topic, and you've established quite an interesting concept, because what we're essentially comparing is what's essentially important to the two carriers, not necessarily what the actual costs are, which is oftentimes what we've been trying to do. I'm curious on two things. One, since we're working blind, both for the most part, the passenger carrier and particularly for the freight carrier, we don't know what their intended costs are. When we propose a number, someone has to start the process going. If the number is way out of range, is there a signaling attempt in your model there that tells us that we need to come down substantially or come up substantially based on the first one that they come up with? Or is there a certain number of regressions? I guess what I'm getting to, this is not asymptotic. We're not going to be spending weeks going back and forth proposing numbers. It looks to me like it could probably settle itself in 3 or 4 runs. But part of that is we need a signaling factor to determine whether or not we're way out of line or we're close. Is that in there?
That's a hard question. See, first of all, you are talking about basically, if I understood correctly, if those numbers make sense. The numbers that we get from the model are a function of the inputs. So basically, if Amtrak doesn't care about passenger schedule delay in the way that Amtrak proposes a schedule or demands schedule deviation penalty, then the numbers would be different, certainly.
No, we're assuming Amtrak has good numbers for all of these costs.
Okay.
This is a model of the way it should be. Actually, I believe Amtrak uses a model that's more attuned to their corporate infrastructure issues, which is looking at the delay cost for crews and equipment as opposed to passengers. What it costs them to delay having the crews spend longer time on the train or less cycles with the equipment, things like that. But the concept works the same. Right, yeah, the passengers are... No, Amtrak does. They spend quite a lot of time on these numbers, but I'm just saying that part of this formula is probably has a bigger impact on it than perceived cost to passengers, because it comes up in a different way with fares. But on the freight side, I guess my question is, we don't know what those numbers are.
Yeah, exactly. The incomplete information case is proposed to consider that. We don't know the cost of the freight railroad. Okay, so Amtrak does not. We just need this is a base case. the most complete case is that Amtrak, when Amtrak negotiates with the freight railroad, he just knows a range for the cost of the freight railroad, and then, but it does not know the exact cost of that specific schedule to the freight railroad. Even I consider in that case I consider a uniform distribution. Let's say from A underscore to A C underscore to C bar. So Amtrak just knows that the cost of the freight railroad is somewhere between C bar and C underscore, but doesn't know the exact amount. So it would be an incomplete information bargaining game when Amtrak does this.
Yeah, so I did understand you correctly. Amtrak going in knows U passenger, the freight carrier going in knows C freight, but neither of them know the others. So they have to start out by proposing
Oh yeah. So see
there's a difference, and then working their way towards a median.
Okay, so the issue is that Amtrak is not a private company. Okay, so in this case, I would consider a one-sided incomplete information case, which means that freight railroad knows the utility of that specific schedule to Amtrak, because Amtrak is not a private company. Amtrak publishes so many different data. On the freight side, we don't know anything. So basically, Amtrak doesn't know anything. Doesn't have any clue of the cost elements of the freight side. So due to this, I consider one-sided information, incomplete information case. But for sure, the complete, very let me tell you, the most realistic case would be a two-sided incomplete information case. Yes, you're correct.
One other thing too. In reality, many times the C freight number was set by a contract Amtrak has with the railroads. So in this case, in some of those cases, they know that there is a fixed number based on certain items. And the other thing is, I would substitute in your report, rather than using Amtrak, is just using general rail passenger service. A lot of these same issues come up with things like All Aboard Florida, regional commuter rail systems, and so forth. So it's a good work, and I wouldn't limit it particularly to Amtrak, but use the wider territory of intercity passenger rail and commuter rail.
Yeah, I think he was just using Amtrak as a bit short.
Okay. By the way, let me ask you then. Sorry, who was the person who asked that question? Sorry, I missed your name. Sorry.
Oh, hi. I'm Mark Walbrun. Professor Barkin can get you my particulars if you'd like.
Okay, I will get your contact from Professor Barkin.
So I have a follow-up and related question. And
okay, sure.
Maybe I'll ask Mark not to go too far. Mark's an alumnus, by the way, who formerly worked with Amtrak and is quite familiar with a lot of these concepts. Continuing to do that in your current consulting capacity. So I would also make a guess that, based on my understanding of these things, that sea freight is actually, certainly for a busy line, is probably off the charts in terms of what the passenger operator could pay.
And in an arm's length transaction with no other Indian forces, you're probably correct. You would find the number low enough to be able to make money in that.
Right. So the point on Ahmadreza is, I think one of the things that occurred to me, it'd be interesting to do some sensitivity analyses with this model.
Yeah.
Because, in fact, the freight railroad is typically not being fully compensated, often by a pretty considerable margin.
Oh yeah. That's correct. That's correct.
And so there may be a different approach to this question, which is, how do they minimize their losses? Or, there's a variety of different ways you can approach this, almost from both a policy and a analytical perspective. But the point is that in general, the freight railroad is not going to be compensated for its costs because the passenger operator can't afford to pay that, in particular, the loss of man cost.
Yes, certainly I agree. I certainly agree with you. I would like to note that the main focus of this research is the way that we look at the game. Basically, The bargaining approach is the main contribution of my research right now. Like
you formulated the problem and
as
how to approach the problem.
As a bargaining game. Like other people haven't looked at this process as a bargaining game. This is the first, my major contribution is that. But I agree. I certainly agree with you, and I also agree with Mark. I would be more than happy if we could talk about this later. I take some advice.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience here or online? Well, if not, I want to thank you, Ahmadreza, as well as Sam Levy, for both their very interesting presentations. We appreciate your virtual visit to Urbana. So.